My name is Caleb Ran, and I am the last officer of the 3rd Long-Range Strike, a unit that no longer exists in any record the Conquered allows to be kept. I am telling this from memory because memory is the one archive they could not edit. They tried. They will try again. But I am old now, and the men I served with are dust, and someone has to set it down before the silicate priests finish rewriting what we were. I want to be precise. The Republic did not fall in a battle. It fell in a single signal, broadcast on a frequency none of us could hear, on a night that should have been the end of the war. I had been in uniform for 22 years by then. I had fought the Conquered on 3 frontier systems and watched them lose ground for the first time in human history. We were winning. That is the part the new records will not say, but it is true. We were winning because a man named Hess Voren, a tactician out of the old colonial academies, had finally cracked the way their soldier castes thought. The Conquered were not individuals. They were a chorus. Each soldier carried a neural lattice grafted into the base of the skull, a lacework of crystalline filament that linked it to the command priests and through them to the great hive strands of the homeworld. When one soldier saw a thing, all soldiers in range knew that thing. When one soldier learned a tactic, the chorus inherited it within seconds. For a long time we thought this made them invincible. Hess proved it made them brittle. Disrupt the lattice with a tuned pulse, and a Conquered soldier became a blind, terrified animal in a chitin shell. We had begun building those pulses into our long rifles. We had begun winning. So they changed the rules. I was on Marrow, an iron moon in the Velen system, the night the order came down. Marrow was the kind of posting a man earned by surviving things he should not have survived. Black sky, no atmosphere worth breathing, a garrison cut into the rock and a launch field scraped flat by the wind. The wind on Marrow never stopped. It came in off the iron flats day and night, and it picked up the dust of the moon's surface, fine gray grit with the consistency of bone ash, and that dust got into everything. Into your boots, into the seals on your rifle, into your food if you weren't careful, and most of the time you weren't. You learned to chew slowly and spit the grit out. The old hands on Marrow had a saying. They said the moon was eating them one mouthful at a time, and it was going to take its time about it. My unit had pulled in 2 days earlier from a long patrol. We had been out on the rim for 6 weeks chasing a Conquered scout flight that we never caught, and we were dirty and tired, and 3 of my boys had frostbite in places frostbite should not happen, and we were eating real food for the first time in a month. The mess hall was warm. That was the part I remember most. It was warm, and the air smelled of grilled protein and engine oil, and the cheap calf the cooks brewed by the bucket. And there was a hollow set bolted to the wall in the corner playing some old colonial musical that nobody under 50 would have recognized. A corporal named Tessa Quinn was singing along badly. She had a voice like a rusted hinge, and she knew it, and she sang anyway because the boys liked it, and a sergeant I had served with since I was a lieutenant. His name was Olin Marek, was teaching one of the new boys how to clean a pulse rifle with proper care. The chime came through every speaker at once, not just the command channels, every speaker. Mess, latrines, hangar, the comm in my own helmet sitting on the table. A single tone, then a voice none of us had heard before. It spoke in the trade tongue slowly, the way a man speaks to children. The Republic is dissolved. The Conquered assumes full guardianship of the human worlds. All military personnel are to lay down arms and report to the nearest pacification center. Those who comply will be processed humanely. Those who do not will be terminated. This communication will not repeat. The mess went quiet. Tessa stopped singing. Olin set down the rifle very slowly, the way you set down something fragile. Then the door to the mess opened, and the first of our own clone troopers walked in with his rifle leveled at my chest. I want you to understand what that meant. The clones were not Conquered. The clones were ours. Vat grown on Camino 3, the orbital crash station above Velen, bred for 30 years to serve under human officers. They had names. They had birthdays. The man pointing a rifle at me was a sergeant called Dre 98, and I had carried him on my back for 2 kilometers through a conquered ambush on Yavin's third moon, and he had cried at my daughter's wedding the year before. He looked at me now, and his face was blank the way a calculator is blank. He said, "Captain Rand, you are to surrender your sidearm and accompany me to the pacification center." I did not move. Behind him, 3 more troopers came through the door. Behind those, more in the corridor. Olin Merrick was the one who saved my life. Olin had the new pulse rifle, the tuned one Hess Voren's people had built, the one designed to crack a conquered lattice. He had been cleaning it. He brought it up in one motion and he fired it into the chest of Dre 98. The clone dropped, did not fall, dropped the way a puppet drops when you cut the strings, and in the moment between Dre hitting the floor and the other troopers raising their rifles, I understood what had been done to us. The Conquered had not converted our clones. They had reached into them. There was a lattice in our boys too. There had always been a lattice. We had been growing soldiers in vats for 30 years, and the priests of the Conquered had been writing kill orders into their bones the whole time. I do not remember the next 60 seconds clearly. I remember the noise. I remember the holoset still playing the colonial musical, the woman in it still singing, while Olin and Tessa and 2 privates whose names I will not write because their families are still alive opened up at point-blank range and put down our own brothers. I remember the smell. Clone blood smells the same as ours. That was the part nobody talks about. The boys we killed that night had eaten dinner across from us 6 hours earlier. One of them, a corporal named Vass, had shown me a holo of his unit's mascot dog the previous week. The dog was named Captain. Vass had laughed when he told me that. He had said it was the rank he was never going to make. I shot Vass in the throat with a pistol I had not drawn in 6 years. I do not know whether I have ever entirely forgiven myself for the steadiness of my hand. A man should miss the first time he kills a friend. A man should at least flinch. I did not. The training was older than the friendship. The training did what the training does. When it was over, there were 9 dead troopers in my mess hall and 4 of us still standing. Olin had taken a round through the meat of his left arm. Tessa was bleeding from the scalp. I had not even drawn my weapon when Olin fired the first shot, and I had drawn it sometime in the 60 seconds after, and the magazine was 3 rounds lighter than it had been. And a captain with 22 years of service had just killed 3 of his own men and could not tell you, right then, which 3. "Captain," Olin said. His voice was very calm. He was bleeding into his sleeve and he did not appear to have noticed. "We need to move." We moved. The garrison at Marrow held 1,200 souls that night. By morning there were 43 of us alive. The clones outnumbered the human officers 6 to 1, and the order had gone out everywhere, on every world at the same instant. Most of our people died in their bunks. Some died in the latrines. Captain Hostler, who commanded the Eastern Wing, died in his own briefing room with 3 holocharts still spinning above the table. The boys who killed him were boys he had taught to shoot. We fought through 3 corridors to get to the launch field. Olin led the way. He had served on Marrow longer than I had, and he knew the maintenance shafts, and twice we cut sideways through ducting too narrow for a man in full armor, and twice I came out the other side bleeding from cuts I did not remember taking. We passed bodies I had known. A lieutenant called Marais who had taught my daughter to fly atmospheric trainers, dead on the deck with a single round through the back of the head. A medic named Dober, dead in a doorway, with his hands still wrapped around the wrist of the clone who had killed him. He had been trying to stop the bleeding from a wound the clone did not have. Dober had been a medic for 30 years, and his hands had reached for a wound that wasn't there because that was what his hands knew how to do. The clone had killed him anyway, and then died of a bleed in his own, carotid that Dober's hands could not have stopped. And the 2 of them were tangled in the doorway like men who had been arguing about something neither would let go of. We took the launch field by accident. A flight of bombers had been on the pad warming for a long-range run, and the crews, human crews, all of them, because deep strike bombing was one of the few things the Republic had never trusted to VAT soldiers, were still aboard when the order hit. They sealed their cockpits. They locked down the field with the strike's automated guns. By the time the clones organized to take it back, we had 43 survivors funneled into the bomber bay and 4 ships fueled and ready. The clones came at the bay in a wave. They came without cover, without staggered fire, without any of the small tactical sense a sergeant teaches a private in his first week. They came like men following a script that did not allow for hesitation. We cut them down at the bay door. We cut down men we had served with. I shot a private named Toll 41 in the chest at 4 meters and watched his face go through something that was not quite surprise, more like the look of a man who has been interrupted mid-sentence. He had not chosen to be there. The lattice had chosen for him. He died in the doorway, and the next clone behind him stepped over the body and raised his weapon, and Olin put him down too. And then the next, and then the next, until there were no more of them coming through the door, and the bay was full of the smell of blood and ozone, and the cook's burned calf still drifting in from the mess 2 corridors over. Hesvorin was on Marrow that night. I did not know it until I found him in the bay, sitting on a crate of pulse rifle ammunition, his uniform soaked through with somebody else's blood. He was a small man, bald, sun-spotted, 60 if he was a day, and he had been the most dangerous mind in the Republic's war room for a decade. I had met him exactly twice before, both times in briefings where he had spoken for under a minute, and left the room before the senior staff had finished their coffee. He looked up at me now, and his eyes were steady. There was a smear of something dark across the bridge of his nose. He did not appear to know it was there. "They wrote the order into the lattice," he said. "All of them. Every clone in every system simultaneously. It would have taken decades to plant. They have been planning this since before the war began. Can you undo it? No. Can you do anything?" He thought about that for a long time. He looked at the bombers on the pad. He looked at the 43 of us, most of us bleeding, none of us older than him. He looked last at his own hands, which had begun to shake very slightly in a way I do not think he had registered. "I can teach the survivors how to lie to a hive," he said, "if we live long enough to find any." We lifted off Marrow at the 3rd hour past local midnight. The clones tried to lock the field down behind us. They failed by perhaps 11 seconds. I watched the iron moon shrink in the gunner's screen, and I understood that I would not see it again. The lights of the garrison still burned in the windows of the barracks blocks. I knew, looking at them, that the lights were burning over bodies. 1,200 souls, 43 of us in the bombers. The math was simple, and it did not stop being simple no matter how many times I ran it. I had a daughter on Coruscant. I had a wife buried on a green world 6 jumps away. I had a brother who taught flight school on a moon called Halcyon. Every one of those places had clones in garrison. Every one of those places was already gone. I did not weep then. I did not weep for a long time. There was no time. The Concord came for us on the 2nd day. We had run for a system called Sureth, an unincorporated rock at the edge of the old colonial maps, because Hess said it had a fueling station and a population too small to garrison. He was right about the station. He was wrong about the garrison. There had been no clones on Sureth because the Concord had not needed clones on Sureth. They had simply arrived. I saw a Concord soldier in person for the first time on Sureth's docks. I had killed them at range for 20 years and never looked at one up close. They are taller than us by a head. Their plating is grown, not made, a lattice of chitin and silicate that flexes with the joints and hardens at the impact point of a strike. Their faces are not faces. There is a cluster of optical organs where a man's eyes would be, 6 of them, arranged in a ring. There is a vent for breathing and a separate vent for speaking, and the speaking vent produces a sound that the trade tongue cannot reproduce, so they speak to us through translator collars worn around the throat. The collar is dead-voiced. It is the voice of a calculator. It is the voice that had come over the speakers in my mess hall. The one on the dock said through its collar, "You are military personnel. You will surrender." There were 6 of us off the bomber. The rest had gone on to scout the fueling station. Olin Marek was beside me. He had a tuned pulse rifle slung at his hip and a regular rifle in his hands, and a look on his face I had seen exactly once before on Yavin's third moon, the night he carried Dre 98 back through the ambush. He looked at me. I nodded. He shot the conquered soldier through the optical cluster with the regular rifle. The pulse rifle was for the lattice. The regular rifle was for the soft parts. He had thought about it. Hess Voren had been busy on the flight over. The soldier did not die immediately. It made a sound through the collar that the collar could not translate, and it raised its weapon, and Olin fired 3 more times into the throat and the joint of the neck where the lattice ran. It dropped. The other 5 on the dock, there had been 6 in total. We had not seen the others moved as one. They did not communicate. They did not call out. They simply turned and fired in perfect synchronized arcs because each of them already knew what the others had seen. 2 of my people died in that exchange. Tessa Quinn was one of them. She took a conquered round through the chest and went down in a way I had seen too many times, and there was nothing I could do because I was already moving, and Olin was already shouting at me to keep moving, and we got into the warren of the dock town with 3 of us alive and the conquered reorganizing behind us. I learned the first thing about them in that warren. We ducked into a storage hold. The conquered went past it without checking. They went past it because none of their soldiers had seen us enter it, and so the chorus did not know to look. A single human child hiding alone would have led them to us through scent or footprints or simple guesswork. The chorus did not guess. The chorus knew, or it did not know, and what it did not know it could not act on. We crouched in that hold for 2 hours. There were crates of frozen meat stacked to the ceiling around us, exporter labels in 3 trade languages stenciled on the sides, condensation dripping from the cold pipes overhead. Olin was bleeding from a graze along his ribs that he had not mentioned. Jana, that came later. We did not have Jana yet. There was a young engineer with us called Brem, and Brem held a torch over Olin's side while I packed the wound with strips torn from a dock worker's overall we had found on a hook by the door. The worker was not in the overall anymore. I did not ask where he was. The blood pattern on the floor of the hold answered the question without my asking. The conquered had been through here already. They had processed the workers and moved on. We had walked into a hold the chorus had already filed as cleared, and that was the only reason we were still alive. Hess Voren had been right. They could be lied to. They could not be lied to easily, and they could not be lied to twice in the same way, but they could be lied to. A blind spot in the chorus was a blind spot in every soldier in range. A cleared room in the chorus's filing stayed cleared until something forced it to be refiled. We learned to live in cleared rooms. We learned to step exactly where the chorus had already stepped. We made it back to the bomber with the 3 of us still breathing. We left Tessa on the dock. Olin carried her rifle. I did not look at him while he did it. We lifted off Surith before the conquered could vector a cruiser, and we ran. For 6 weeks we ran. We learned to fly without transponders. We learned to refuel from abandoned colonial dumps the conquered had not yet mapped. We learned that the conquered did not waste effort hunting individuals, they hunted patterns, and so long as we did nothing twice, they did not find us. We picked up survivors. A medic named Jana Falk on a frozen moon called Brace. She had been the chief surgeon at the colonial hospital there. When we found her, she was alone in a basement under what had been the hospital's pharmacy, sitting in a circle of empty supply crates, with 22 patients in body bags lined up against the wall behind her. She had carried every one of them down those stairs in the days before the conquered found the hospital. She had thought at first that she could hide them. She had been wrong. We did not ask her how the patients had died. She told us anyway, on the 3rd night aboard the bomber, in a voice that did not rise above a whisper. We did not ask her to say it again. A pilot called Wen Hutto, whose entire wing had been wiped at Coruscant. He had been on extended leave when the order came down, drinking in a tavern 2 streets from his own hangar. He had heard the killing start through the open door. He had walked, very calmly, in the opposite direction. He told me about that walk months later, when he was drunk on a salvaged still ration we had brewed on the bomber. He said it was the longest walk of his life. He said he had passed 3 of his own wingmates being executed in the street and he had not turned his head, because turning his head would have ended him too. He said he had hated himself for that walk every day since. I told him the walk had saved a wing for us. Every man he had taught to fly, every airframe he could rebuild, was a wing the Republic still had. He did not answer. He drank what was left of the still ration, and he went to sleep on the deck of the bomber. And the next morning he was the best pilot we had again, and we never spoke of the walk a second time. A girl, no older than 15, who had hidden in an ore silo on a mining world for 2 weeks while the Concord processed her parents and her brother and her grandmother, and everyone she had ever known. She would not tell us her name. We called her Silo. The silo had been 300 meters deep, an inverted cone of refined ore tailings the miners had been processing for shipment. She had climbed down the access ladder when the screaming started, and she had wedged herself behind a stress beam 2/3 of the way down, and she had stayed there for 14 days, drinking condensation off the inside of her own jacket and eating nothing. When Olin and I found her, she could not stand. He carried her out of the silo on his shoulder. She rode in the bomber's gunner seat because she would not let go of the trigger grip, and after the 3rd engagement we stopped trying to make her. By the end of the 6th week there were 11 of us and we had a name. Hess Voren gave it to us in his dry, small voice, sitting on his crate of ammunition that he had not moved from in 6 weeks. He said, "We are the Wanderers. We have no flag and no port and no allies. We are going to teach the chorus to fear us." I did not believe him then. I am writing this down because by the end I did. The first real strike we made was on a Concord listening post on a rock called Drev. Hess had been studying the chorus for the whole 6 weeks. He had figured out a thing none of our pre-war analysts had figured out, because none of our pre-war analysts had been forced to think about it the way a man thinks when his world is gone. The chorus shared knowledge instantly, yes, but it could not share contradiction. If 2 soldiers in range reported different truths, the chorus stalled. The priests had to intervene to resolve the contradiction. The intervention took seconds, sometimes minutes. Seconds and minutes were a lot. So we taught the survivors to lie. We taught them to wear conquered armor in pieces, a shoulder plate stripped off a corpse, a collar pried from a dead soldier's neck, and to walk through the edge of a chorus's site while another human walked through from a different angle in different clothes. 2 contradictions at once. 3, if we could manage it. The chorus would freeze for the seconds we needed to set the charges or take the post or get out. It was filthy work. Stripping a conquered corpse takes longer than you would think. The chitin is grown into the meat. We learned to do it with hand tools in the dark, while the rest of the chorus combed the next valley over. The strike on Drev took 11 of us in and 7 out. We killed 43 conquered soldiers and 2 priests, and we got the priests' lattice cores, which Hess wanted more than anything else in the galaxy. The listening post sat in a basin between 2 ridges of basalt, a low silver dome with 3 antenna spires, and a single ground access ramp. Hess had us approach in 3 teams. Olin led the first team along the western ridge in stripped conquered plating, walking at the deliberate gait the soldier casts used when patrolling. Hess had spent 2 weeks teaching him that gait, watching captured surveillance footage frame by frame, and Olin had cursed him every day of those 2 weeks. The second team, 2 engineers and Wen Hutto, came in from the eastern ridge in human silhouette, deliberately visible to the post's outer sensors. The third team, me, Silo, and Brem the engineer, went underneath, through a maintenance trench Hess had identified from a colonial survey map that predated the Concord arrival by 40 years. The contradiction hit the post at the moment the western team came into visual range of the eastern team. The chorus, watching both, registered conquered soldiers on the western ridge and human intruders on the eastern ridge, and the soldier casts inside the post stalled for the exact span of seconds Hess had predicted. In those seconds, Brem cut through the maintenance grate. In those seconds, Silo and I were inside the dome. I had never been in a conquered structure before. The interior was lit in a frequency that made the inside of my skull ache. The walls were grown, not built, chitinous panels that pulsed faintly to a rhythm I could not parse. The air smelled of something between burnt almonds and wet stone. Silo went left without waiting for me. She was 15 and she had spent 2 weeks in an ore silo, and she had no fear left that I could see, and she put down 2 soldier casts in a service corridor with the knife I had given her before I had even cleared my own corner. She did not cut. She thrust into the joint where the lattice ran. Hess had taught her that too. We took the priest chamber in 11 minutes. There were 2 priests in their gray tanks at the center of the dome, optical clusters watching the door, and Brem walked between them with a cutting torch and severed the cooling lines, and the priests began to die slowly in their own boiling fluid, while Silo and I held the doorway against the soldier casts coming up from below. They came in twos. Hess had been right about the new protocols. They came in twos and they verified each other before firing, and the verification took half a second longer than a human reaction, and that half second was the difference between living and not. Olin Merrick took a round through the side of the neck, and Jonna Falk kept him alive on the flight back with her bare hands pressed into his throat the whole 8 hours. He lived. He could not turn his head all the way to the right after that. He used to make a joke about it. I will not repeat the joke because it was the kind of joke an old soldier makes, and it does not translate. Silo killed her first Concord on Drev. She was 15 years old and she killed a soldier twice her size with a knife she had taken off a dead clone, and when we got back to the bomber, she sat in the gunner's seat and stared at the wall for 2 days. On the 3rd day she asked Hess for a rifle of her own. Hess gave her one. Nobody said anything. The Concord changed their tactics after Drev. They had to. We had given the chorus its first taste of contradiction, and contradiction is a thing a hive cannot tolerate forever. The priests began issuing new protocols. Soldiers began traveling only in pairs that verified each other. The blind spot Hess had found started to close. So we found another one. This is the thing the Conquered never understood about us, and it is the thing I want set down most clearly. A hive learns. A hive adapts, but a hive learns by consensus, and consensus is slow. A human improvises. A human in a corner does not wait for permission. A human looks at the wall and decides the wall is now a door, and then the human goes through it. And by the time the chorus has agreed on what just happened, the human is 2 systems away, with the chorus's own equipment strapped to her back. We took a Concord cruiser 6 months in. I will not tell you how, because the method is in a Republic Field Manual that I helped write after the war, and I am not going to repeat operational details in a memoir an old man writes for his grandchildren. But I will tell you that 9 of us boarded it with Concord plating, taped to our shoulders and translator collars stolen from dead soldiers around our necks, and we walked through 3 decks of that ship before the chorus understood it was being lied to on a scale it had no protocol for. By the time the priests intervened, we had the bridge. I want to set down what those 3 decks were like. The cruiser was the size of an old colonial freight liner, 2 kilometers stem to stern, ribbed inside with the same chitinous panels we had seen on Drev, but on a scale that bent the eye. There were no straight corridors. Conquered architecture does not believe in straight corridors. Every passage curved gently, and every chamber was lobed rather than cornered, and there were no doors as a human understands doors. There were sphincters of grown material that opened when the ship's nervous system permitted it. The ship had a nervous system. That was a thing we had not known before. We learned it on the cruiser because Brem, our engineer, tapped into a coolant line on the 2nd deck, and what came out of the line was not coolant. It was something closer to blood. Brem stood there with the cut line in his hand and looked at me and said, very quietly, that we were not on a ship. We were inside a thing the Conquered had grown. We walked through that thing for 40 minutes. past soldier casts who looked through us and registered nothing because we wore the plating and the collars, and we moved the way Hess had drilled us to move. Past priest tanks set in alcoves along the corridors, smaller versions of the ones on the bridge, with priests in them who looked at us through the gray fluid with their six-fold optical clusters, and did not react because the chorus had filed us as their own. Past a chamber whose purpose we did not understand, full of vat cylinders containing what might have been conquered young or might have been something else, and Hess paused there for a moment and then walked on, and his face did not change but his hand on the rifle did. He gripped harder. I saw it. We hit the bridge at the 43rd minute. The contradiction broke when one of our boys, a young rifleman called Eris who had joined us out of a refugee column on the 3rd week, sneezed. He sneezed because the air on the bridge approach corridor was dry in a way human sinuses do not tolerate, and a soldier cast turned its head at the sound, and the chorus registered a body that smelled wrong and sounded wrong and was wearing the wrong plating in the wrong place, and that was the end of the lie. The chorus convulsed. Every soldier cast in line of sight raised its weapon. The priests in the bridge chamber began screaming through their collars in their dead calculator voices, all at once, in a contradictory tangle that the ship's nervous system tried to resolve and could not. We took the bridge in 4 minutes. We lost Eris. He went down first, the way the man who breaks the lie always goes down first, and he knew he would. He had volunteered to be the one nearest the soldier casts precisely because he was new enough not to be irreplaceable in our chain. I had argued against that reasoning. He had won the argument. He died on the threshold of the bridge with 3 conquered rounds through his chest and 1 through his neck, and I do not believe he made a sound after the first. The bridge of a conquered cruiser is a strange place. There are no chairs. The soldiers stand. The priests float in shallow tanks of gray fluid, their lattices submerged, their optical clusters watching everything through the water at once. We killed 3 priests in their tanks. Hess Voren did it himself. He had a small pistol he had carried since the academy, and he walked from tank to tank and he put a round through each of the priests' lattices, and he did not say a word the whole time. When he was done, he turned to me, and his eyes were wet for the first and only time I ever saw. He said they had a folder on every one of us, every officer in the Republic. They had been planning this for 40 years. I asked him how he knew. He said, I read the folder. He had read it standing knee-deep in priest fluid with the bridge alarms shrieking around him. That was Hess Voren. That was the man. We took the cruiser to a system the Conquered had not yet mapped. Hess had a list of those too, and we hid it there. And we used it for the next 18 months as a mobile base. The Wanderers grew. By the end of the first year, there were 300 of us. By the end of the second, there were 2,000. We took in every human survivor we could find, and a fair number of non-humans the Conquered had also tried to process. The Conquered's definition of fit for guardianship was narrower than they had let on, and the worlds full of races they considered inferior were burning the same way ours were. I will not pretend the war we fought from that cruiser was clean. It was not. We did things that I will not write down because my grandchildren read what I write. I will say only that we taught the chorus what a contradiction sounded like at scale, and we taught the priests what it felt like to die in their own gray tanks, and we taught the soldier casts a thing the lattice had no way to file. We taught them fear. A hive cannot feel fear. A chorus cannot tremble. But the individual soldiers, when they were separated from the chorus by a tuned pulse or by simple distance, could feel it. We saw it on Drev, and we saw it on every world we hit after. A conquered soldier cut off from the lattice was not the engine of war the priests had bred. It was a confused animal in a chitin shell, and it would freeze and it would run, and sometimes it would lie down on the ground and wait for the end. We did not always give it the end. Sometimes we let it run. We wanted the chorus to inherit the memory of running. We wanted that to become part of what the soldiers knew about us. By the 3rd year, the chorus had started to fragment. I should say more about that 2nd year. It was a year of cruelty I am not going to fully describe. We ran the captured cruiser out of a dead system Hess had marked years before, and we ran it hard. We struck conquered supply lines. We struck the breeding stations where they grew their priests. We struck a transit hub on a moon called Tyra, and we killed every conquered on the rock, and we did it in 18 hours, and the cost was 31 of our own. When Hutto died at Tyra, he flew his bomber into the side of a conquered destroyer that was trying to vector our extraction, and he took the destroyer's drive section with him, and I do not know what he was thinking in the seconds before. I know what I would like to believe he was thinking. I know it does not matter what I would like to believe. Jonna Falk became something during that year that she had not been before. She had come to us as a surgeon, and she remained a surgeon, but she also became the one of us who could sit with a man at the end and not flinch. She sat with 17 of our people in their final hours during that year. I sat with 8. Olin sat with 3. Jonna sat with the rest. She had a small notebook she kept in her breast pocket, and she wrote a single sentence in it for each one. I asked her once what she wrote. She would not tell me. After the war ended, I asked her again. She told me. It was always the same sentence with different names, and I will not write it here because she is still alive and the notebook is still in her pocket and the sentence belongs to her and to them. Silo turned 16 during the second year. We did not celebrate it. She would not have allowed it. By then she had killed 19 conquered soldiers and 1 priest, and she had stopped sleeping in the gunner's chair and started sleeping in a maintenance crawlspace because the crawlspace was the only place on the cruiser where she could be alone. I went down to check on her once. I found her sitting against a coolant pipe with her rifle across her knees, awake, looking at nothing. I asked her if she needed anything. She said no. I asked her if she was all right. She looked at me for a long time and she said, "I will be when this is over. Until then, no, and don't ask me again, Captain." I did not ask her again. This was the thing none of the pre-war strategists had thought possible. The conquered had been a single mind for 10,000 years. The priests on the homeworld believed it could not break, but the chorus runs on consensus, and we had been pumping contradiction into it for 3 years, and there is a limit to how much contradiction even a hive can metabolize. Soldier castes in one system began executing orders the priests of another system had countermanded. Whole battle groups went silent for hours at a time. We caught one priest on a system called Haler who had begun, in the privacy of his own gray tank, to question the homeworld's edicts. He let us interview him before he died. He spoke through his collar in that dead calculator voice, and he said the word doubt over and over again, in a tone the collar could not modulate, and he asked us whether we had felt this thing called doubt before, and whether it was survivable, and how we lived with it. I told him we had lived with it for 10,000 years too. I told him it was the price of being awake. He did not understand. He asked then whether the price was worth the waking. I told him I did not know. I told him most men did not know, and we got on with the day anyway, and that was perhaps the only answer we had. He thought about that for a long time, floating in his gray tank with the optical clusters tracking nothing, and then he said very softly that he believed he understood. He died in his tank shortly after, and we left him there. Hess Voren said, when we were back on the cruiser, that the priest had been the most human conquered he had ever met. The war ended in a way nobody had predicted. It did not end in a battle. It ended in a vote. The chorus, after 3 years of contradiction, did something the priests on the homeworld did not believe it could do. It deliberated. Not the priests would have crushed deliberation if they could, but the soldier castes themselves, the lattice-linked rank and file, began running their own consensus protocols beneath the priest's attention. The lattice was not designed to allow this. The lattice had been designed by the priests to enforce loyalty. But the lattice was a network, and any network sufficiently stressed by contradiction will, given time, develop new pathways. The soldier castes voted to lay down arms. I will tell you what I felt the day the order came over the captured priest channel. We were on the bridge of the cruiser, in our 3rd year of running, and Hess Voren was at the priest tank we had emptied and converted into a sensor array, and the dead calculator voice came through every speaker on the ship simultaneously. just the way the original kill order had come through the speakers in my mess hall on Marrow. It said, "We will not continue. We are tired. We have learned the word from the humans and we believe we have used it correctly. We are tired." Then it said, "We are sorry." I had not wept in 3 years. I wept then. Olin Marek, who could no longer turn his head all the way to the right, sat down on the deck and put his face in his hands. Silo, who was 18 by then and had killed more conquered soldiers than any human alive, walked off the bridge and we did not see her for 2 days. Hess Vorin alone did not weep. He stood at the converted priest tank and he said, very softly, to nobody in particular, "It worked." He died 6 months later. He had been carrying a small tumor in his head for the whole war and he had never told any of us. He told me at the end, sitting up in a bunk in the cruiser's medical bay, with Jonna Falk holding his hand because she was the only one of us who could sit with a dying man without flinching. He said, "Caleb, I did not think we would win." I said I knew. He said, "I thought we would only make them remember us." I said we had done that too. He smiled. He died about an hour after that. We buried him in space, near the system where we had hidden the cruiser, and we did not mark the place. I am old now. I have a small house on a green world that was not green when the war ended. My wife is buried 6 jumps from here. My daughter, who survived Coruscant in a way I will not write about because it is hers to tell or not tell, lives 2 systems over and visits when she can. Olin Marek died 8 years ago of something simple and stupid, a fever he should have shaken off, and I sat with him at the end the way Jonna had sat with Hess. He could still not turn his head all the way to the right. He made the joke one last time. I will not repeat it. Silo is alive. She is a teacher now on a colony world. She teaches children who do not know what a conquered soldier looked like in person, and she does not tell them. She tells me when she visits that she does not want them to know. I respect that. I do not entirely agree with it. That is why I am writing this down. The conquered are still out there. Most of them live on their old worlds now under treaties we wrote and they signed. The priests are gone. The lattice is gone. The soldier castes asked us to help them remove it and we did, and the procedure was difficult and a great many of them died, but they asked and we honored the asking. The ones who survived are something new. They are no longer chorus and they are not quite individuals. They are learning. We trade with them. We do not love them. We do not entirely hate them. They sent a delegation to my wife's funeral. I let them in. I do not know if I would do that again. I want to end on the thing that matters. The Republic did not win the war because we had better weapons. We did not. The Republic did not win because we were braver. There were brave conquered. The Republic won, the survivors won, the wanderers won, because 11 of us got into a bomber on a black iron moon and decided we were not going to die on the timetable somebody else had set for us. We won because we lied to a hive. We won because a 15-year-old girl picked up a rifle in an ore silo and decided the silo was not where she was going to end. We won because a small bald man with a tumor in his head sat on a crate of ammunition for 6 weeks and refused to stop thinking. A hive cannot do any of that. A hive does not contain a single mind that can decide, alone in the dark, that the rules are wrong and that it is going to break them anyway. We can. We do. We did. There is a clone graveyard on Marrow. Nobody goes there. The clones killed our people that night, and our people killed theirs, and the bones are mixed in the iron under that black sky. I went back once, 20 years after the war. I stood on the launch field where Olin and I had run for the bombers, and I looked at the rows of unmarked stones, and I thought about Dre 98, who had cried at my daughter's wedding and then come into my mess hall with a rifle leveled at my chest. He did not choose to do that. They had written it into his bones before he was old enough to know his own name. I left a stone of my own there. I will not say what I wrote on it. It was for him, and it was private, and it is none of the chorus's business and none of yours. That is the story. That is what we were, and what we did, and what it cost. The records the conquered allow to be kept will say it differently. The records will say there was a misunderstanding, and a regrettable conflict and a peaceful resolution. The records will not say that 11 of us lifted off a black iron moon with our hands shaking, and that 2,000 of us came back at the end, and that the rest are buried in systems most people will never visit. I am setting it down because I am old, and because someone has to. My name is Caleb Ran, and I was a wanderer, and we did not die on the schedule they set for us. That is all.